shouldn't we move away from St James's?
The fact that this city and this area is so tied to this football club, it's so important. There was a lot of people who took a look at it and said that stadium issue is
one topic we've heard a bit about recently, this mythical, long-awaited feasibility study about the stadium, and then the training ground, which I think some people also forget about sometimes. We've seen a few things happen. Obviously, they've put out the statement about, the results will be out, everything will be talked about a bit more clearly early 2025. We've seen Roger Thornton hired at the club, appointed to the board, an associate of the Rubens, let's say, an asset manager who manages real estate portfolios largely in the Newcastle area. This is a topic that that likely causes tension between a lot of Newcastle fans, right? Shouldn't we move away from St James's? Personally, we've talked about this recently on the show. Personally, for me, and I think for a lot of us at NUFC360, if we stay city centre, we're all for a new stadium. But it's very much a heart versus head argument. I think that's probably the same for a lot of people. Someone who's a Bradford City fan can come at this with a fresh perspective. Where would you sit, do you think, if you were as emotionally tied to this as the rest of us are?
I think, like I've always said, I'm a strange kind of hybrid, I think, in some ways, because I'm very much about the emotion of it's something that you really have to tie into. If you're the owners of Newcastle United, if you're the manager of Newcastle United, you have to tap into that huge passion that the Newcastle United fans have, and that's partly about history. It's partly about all those kind of things. It's about the fact that this city and this area is so tied to this football club. It's so important within the club, and I think St James's Park is obviously part of that. So I think my starting point would be to stay at St James's Park, rebuild it. But I also have been to the new Everton Stadium. I've seen it. I've been inside the kind of structure they've got there. It looks absolutely stunning. I think if you can deliver something to Newcastle United fans, mind-blowing and world-leading, then I think you would probably take them on the journey with you. The question is, and this is the reason why the debate is so difficult to kind of pin at the moment, why I think whenever you see fans polled, the polling is very, very clear that they want to stay at St James's Park, because St James's Park has so many advantages. It's a stunning city centre location. The stadium as it is looks great at the moment, although I think it's looking a bit tired in a lot of ways as well. It's definitely showing its age in some ways, especially when you look at some of the other clubs there. The offering that you get inside the stadium is nowhere near as good as some other places, it's fair to say.
Room temperature bottles of Carling. I don't know what you mean. I don't know what you mean. That is world leading. That is world leading. A slightly lukewarm hot dog and room temperature Carling.
It's not quite there. When I went to Everton, they were talking about the long bar, that they've got there, and it's going to be the longest bar in football. They're going to get kind of local breweries on board and all these kind of things. And you think, yeah, Newcastle are missing a trick there. They're miles behind, and it's a club where you could get people to come into the stadium early, and you could get people would happily mill around that stadium and happily be part of a bigger, every time I go past Stack, it's packed. Absolutely packed. And it's quite, packed. It looks smart, and the food in there is great, and the beer's pretty good as well. But it's a small offering compared to what other clubs. And when you look at the US, which is obviously where there's this big market, those stadiums are absolutely stunning, and that's what kind of Manchester United are looking at. Can you do that within St James's Park is my question. And it's all very well us as kind of I'm 42, my son's 6. When he wants to go to St James's Park, if he ever wants to go to St James's Park, then you're kind of thinking, well, when he gets to 18 or when he gets to 20, if the stadium's still as it is, you've got to consider, are people gonna want to just turn up for the game, and because it's not a particularly nice place to go, because in 20 years' time, it will look very faded and jaded. And we've all been to Old Trafford, and Old Trafford has got incredible history, but it's showing its age, and the offering around there isn't great either. It's
the scenery of the UK's the tallest waterfall and everything is pretty nice.
It's amazing, but that's what happens if it's left too. Even the Etihad, which is another stadium I've been to quite a few times, as for my role recently. You see what they're doing there, and they're really they're not kind of content with the fact that what it looks like at the moment. They're building this this new part of it as well. And these are the clubs that Newcastle want to aspire to be close to. So if the option is for me 5,000 extra seats on St James's Park at a cost of like 200 million or whatever, I don't think it's worth it. I don't think that is particularly. I think it buys you a bit of time, but it buys you time in order to be able to do something spectacular, and that's what you have to do. So the answer to that question, I think, is if you can find somewhere a decent site and build something absolutely spectacular, I think the numbers will flip, and suddenly you'll get people going, I love St James's Park, but wow, look at what they're going to build us. It's going to have 75,000 or it's going to have 80,000, and we're all going to be able to get in, and it's going to have these incredible, under the ground kind of like, conference facilities in this, and all of these things are going to be included in it. And you would start to see people go, well, St James's Park was massive, but we didn't ever win anything there. It doesn't get us where we need to be in terms of building for a squad. It doesn't secure our future, because PIF are investors, right? They're going to sell the club at some point. They're not going to be here forever. They're going to sell the club at some point. And if they sell the club,
a stadium's a big shiny asset to stick to add to the price tag, right?
And also, like, if they sell the club and they haven't resolved the stadium issue, you're going to have a lot less people buying who want to buy the football club. That was the reason why Mike Ashley couldn't sell the club for the price that he wanted at first, because there was a lot of people who took a look at it and said that stadium issue is a deal breaker for me, because I can't put the money in that's required to get it. I mean, Ineos looked at it. Ineos looked at Newcastle and decided they didn't want to buy it because they couldn't do anything. They couldn't do what they needed to do with the stadium. That's a problem. So for me, I'm not as against the new stadium as anybody else, but the problem is we've been having this conversation for 12 months and the club is still not saying anything about the different options that they're looking at. The statement that they gave was fine. It was a holding statement. It was kicking the can down the road again. I think they owe the fans to start talking about because what they've told us is a tiny fraction of what they know now about where they want to be. There's a few people within the football club who've been presented with those options. And look, it's time to start trusting the fans to be able to make their own decisions. If you go out and tell people what you're thinking about, it's not going to create some furore. It's not some dirty secret that you need to kind of keep within the four walls of Newcastle United. It is a honest, people are grown up enough to know that, look, if you're thinking about leaving the stadium, like, show us what it is. And it has created, I think, the problem is with this going on for so long, it's created a lot of kind of rumor and counter rumor about it. So the big rumor in the summer was, of course, and the things that people were saying in the summer was like, look, PIF aren't going to do anything. They've lost interest. They're not interested in doing anything with the stadium. That seems to have that narrative seems to slightly changed in the last 6 weeks or so. And I think, they are obviously considering some pretty big options that could potentially transform St James's Park. And one of them is obviously sort of knocking down the stadium on the land as it is now and rebuilding a stadium in the same area and kind of buying up some land around it, which I think would be probably the best of all worlds in a lot of ways. Building a new stadium on the site, but where are you going to play? Is a
like was it the old Sir John Hall idea? Build it on Leazes Park. I think everyone on Twitter has seen the sort of 3D render of you build 2/3, 3/4 of a stadium that went until it's suitable for use, then you knock down St James's and finish the rest, right? And then obviously that would dig up all the old issues that prevented a stadium being built on Leazes Park back in the day, like decades ago.
I mean, if it was a money no option idea, you said you were saying to PIF, look, if you pick up the bill for this, my option would be go in and renovate Gateshead International Stadium, turn it into there would be ways and means of turning that into like maybe a 30,000 capacity, like temporarily 30,000, but build something that's pretty, build something that's a kind of maybe a multi-use facility there, but build something, spend some money there as well, and maybe get some investors in there as well, do something there. And look, you have a lot of people locked out for a year or two there, which is a difficult thing. That's what Barcelona have done with the new camp. Obviously, they moved to the Olympic Stadium.
The Olympic Stadium, yeah.
I mean, Real Madrid, I think, played for for a few years in a vastly reduced capacity Real Madrid. It does happen. I think that's what you could do. You could give something to Gateshead then as well. Gateshead would have a stadium that would potentially be worth something for them. The council would get something as well. And then you can play there for maybe a year or two, or maybe one season and rebuild St James's Park. But again, it's fantasy football when PIF are very much looking at this as an asset and an investment. And are they going to go out and do that? But it's interesting, actually. One of the things that was said to me after, because I did a big piece on PIF and where they stand now, and a lot of that was about, look, this is an investment. Everything that they spend has to be very much, has to have a reason for spending, and it has to add value to the investment. And that was really made clear. And the days of the blank checkbook were over, kind of thing, if they were ever there at Newcastle, which I'm not convinced they were. But one thing that somebody did say was, look, that's all true, and they aren't going to go out and spend multi-millions of pounds and billions of pounds on various different things for Newcastle, without expecting that to add some money to the investment. But when they did their due diligence on Newcastle United, they were aware of the stadium issue and did put it in the business plan. So that makes me feel a little bit more optimistic that, look, they are prepared to spend big on this because they knew this was coming. And maybe that's one of the reasons why they haven't thrown as much money into other things as maybe we thought they would. Maybe why they aren't, going after PSR. And, look, they don't have to spend, they don't have to fund it entirely themselves. There's lots of different ways that you could kind of like go into do. The club could take out loans to pay for it. It may have an impact on the club and how, but that is an option. The PIF don't have to write a single check for £1 billion. They don't have to do that. We'll see anyway. I suspect they will end up writing the check and investing.
I mean, they've got their target now as well, anyway, don't they? When we mentioned earlier, some of the improvements you mentioned, the concessions at various clubs. You mentioned Everton, for example. Obviously, we know all the hype that Tottenham Hotspur Stadium got. That cost them £1 billion, and that sort of overran quite a bit. Obviously, you mentioned Real Madrid, the new Bernabeu has all the sort of the modern amenities of a gigantic multi-event stadium, right? The pitch that pulls apart and can go underground to make way for NFL games and big concerts. And you look in America, like obviously PIF has a lot of investments in American companies, right? You look at the NFL, for example, in LA, the Chargers and the Rams play in SoFi Stadium, which I think it costs about $5 or $6 billion. So there's this whole range of, if they want to be world leading, and obviously they are, like you say, they are sort of sound investors. They want a return long term. There is also, I think, an element that I think if you look culturally and sort of more geopolitically, there is this sort of idea or the stereotype that Saudi owners, you would think, don't want to really play. They don't want to be second fiddle to anyone. They don't want to be second best. They would want, you'd imagine, a world leading venue. So they have that sort of range, you'd imagine, of what it's going to cost. And like you say, you factor in the stadium into the business plan. They probably know or knew when they bought the club, hey, somewhere down the line, we're going to be spending either a large chunk of hundreds of millions to renovate St James's, because that's probably what it would cost to get the concessions, the network infrastructure, the ticketing system, which still needs reworking, and all the physical infrastructure needs reworking. Or then rebuilding, which I think a brand new stadium probably would cost upwards of £1 billion, considering inflation nowadays. Like you say, I think you're right on when you mention a lot of the sort of the vague nature of it is sort of causing a lot of speculation, both negative and positive. And it would be very good to have some actual concrete information and concrete announcements. We've got Brighton coming up in a few days. All the other noise outside of the first team aside, and obviously it's relevant that we haven't really talked much about the football that's been played. There's been so much other external noise. What are your feelings at the moment regarding where the team might be for Brighton? Obviously, Brighton play quite nice football, quite attacking football, and obviously we've had some issues with form this season, but they seem to be improving. Where do you see us sort of performing against Brighton?
Yeah, really, I was kind of having a look the other day at the fixtures between now and kind of the next international break, which is in a month. Wow, what a run of games that they've got between now and that next international break. They've got Arsenal, Chelsea twice, including the League Cup, Brighton, the away game. I've forgotten the away game is. There's a decent away game in there as well, which I've forgotten who it is. But it's a heck of a run of games. And starting with Brighton, and Brighton actually probably looks like the game that's probably the one that I would say is the almost like the one that you would expect them to get something from. It's at Nottingham Forest away. That's it, which is another tough game. I mean, that's a difficult game.
They've been pretty good this year.
Yeah, but yeah, so Brighton is maybe the one that you kind of look at and you think, well, that's one that you maybe would target and say that's one that you need to get something out of. But Brighton have been a little bit up and down. I think, they obviously beat Spurs last time, but maybe was that a little bit Spurs throwing it away? I'm not sure. There was definitely a point, I think, in where Brighton looked a little bit vulnerable in that game, and I do think there's vulnerability to exploit there. I don't think they're quite as good as they were in the point of last season where they were very, very good and looked almost unbeatable. I think can't necessarily see them finishing as high as they did the year that Newcastle finished fourth. I think there's a team, there's some vulnerabilities there, but Newcastle have shown that as well. I don't think Newcastle have really hit the stride played anywhere near their peak level yet. Obviously, the game against Everton last time out was pretty much summed up what the season's been like so far. There was periods where you thought, yeah, they look pretty good here, but the cutting edge wasn't necessarily there. Too many players out of form, too many players not really performing where they need to. And ultimately, it was kind of like, it was difficult to kind of discern how good that result was because it was a point at Everton, which you would say, some years you would say that's a good performance. And Everton haven't been as bad as maybe people sort of would look at from the league. They've not been that bad. They've obviously had a couple of absolutely stinking results, but they've been competitive for most of the games they've played. And so for me, I don't think it was a horrific result, but coupled in with everything that's happened so far this season, it's difficult to read how good Newcastle United are this season. I think there's so much room for improvement. If Isak comes back and is anywhere near full fitness, then I think they are a better team already. Bruno is starting to get there, but again, he's been away in Brazil. It took him a while to get back into it again, so it's not ideal for Newcastle. You may even see Bruno on the bench on Saturday. Given the lack of time the lack of turnaround time that he'll get. But Sandro Tonali's playing, I think, tonight as well. So it's not as if any of those Newcastle players have been around in this international break. So difficult game. I think really one that they need to win or get something from. I would be starting to, if Newcastle can be there or thereabouts at the end of this international break, then I think they've done. We can start to breathe a little bit easier about where this team's going to finish this season because they've had a fairly generous start. I don't think they've played too many difficult teams, but ironically, probably the most difficult team they've played was their best performance. They probably could have won that game against Manchester City. They put them under a lot of pressure. I think with a fit Isak, they might have even won that game because they did give Man City a lot of problems in that second half in particular. So they need to go and kick on, I think, and do more of that. Since that game, there was the absolutely horrific midweek performance against Wimbledon, which we don't talk about because that was just one of the most forgettable performances under Eddie Howe, I think it's fair to say, since the very start of that era. And then you had the Everton nobody really knew what was going on with that Everton game because it was it was unclear, I think, whether that's going to be a good point or not will probably tell us at the end of the season. But there's so much room for improvement with Newcastle now. There is so much room for improvement. And that's what I'm kind of clinging on to. I actually think the season's not been that bad so far. Because
one loss is not that bad.
Exactly. And it was a bad loss, but it's one loss. They aren't the only team that have had a bad, they're the only team that's still finding their straps, are they? There's a lot of teams in the same boat. A lot of teams haven't played that well. Even Man City, you would say, haven't played necessarily that well this season. They haven't been beaten yet, but they've dropped points where maybe they wouldn't have thought they would. And they've been quite fortunate in some of the games. They've conceded a lot of goals. So Man City are in the same boat as a lot of teams. I think probably we'll know a little bit more by the end of November where we are on this season, especially with the teams that really tough games that they've got to play in the next month or so. Start with Brighton. I think they can get something out of it. I think it'd be great for them if they did get something out of it because I think it's it would give them a bit of a springboard into the next few games. Because so it's a difficult looking November, isn't it? It's a difficult looking November.
Can I try and eke a score prediction out of you for the Brighton game?
Let's say 2-1 Newcastle. I'm always more optimistic than I am. I never really predict a Newcastle defeat, to be honest with you, unless I'm really really in a bad mood form. But I do think they can get something out of this one. I think they could get something out of this. What I always like is when Eddie Howe comes back after international break, he's had a bit of time to plan. The team are always better when Howe's had that amount of time to plan, and they will have had a good amount of time on the training ground to do that. And I think they'll have a clear idea of how they're going to play, how they're going to exploit Brighton. And, I think Brighton are a good team, but they had a bit of a sugar rush, I think, in the second half against Spurs, against a Spurs team that are vulnerable and are there to be got at as well. And I think Newcastle will be a lot harder for them to play against. So 2-1.
Yeah, I'll take that. Yeah, I'll take that now. Just to stop the count. Just we'll put that in the results now. Other than that, Mark, it's been a very enjoyable chat with you. Anything else that you're working on at the moment or planning on that you want to plug?
I've been at the Eye for 3 years now coming up. We've got a lot of Newcastle stuff coming up. That's what I can say. We do, we really are like pushing the kind of Newcastle coverage there at the moment. I think you might have to, if you read a certain number of articles, I think you have to subscribe. But it's fairly reasonable if you want to subscribe. And we've got loads of really good stuff coming up as well. So it's just keep encouraging people to kind of keep reading stuff, because we've got. I'm trying to think. I've got a few things coming on. I don't want to kind of say too much about them, but I've got a few interesting things. But obviously tomorrow morning, this kind of big data read, which hopefully people kind of find interesting and respond to well, because with a few of those bigger longer reads on things like Stadium and the PIF, people have been really kind of I think it's what people want to read now. I think people kind of want to read this kind of information packed pieces rather than maybe the too much of the. I mean, I think opinion's good, opinion's great, but I don't want to read somebody else's opinion. I don't want to be writing about what Simon Jordan thinks about Newcastle United, for example. I think this is a little bit more of the future, and this is what Newcastle fans want to read.
If you have liked this episode, maybe put a comment in the comment section below what you think about the stadium speculation, what your score prediction might be for Brighton, and whether or not you have any questions for Mark. Like, share, and subscribe the video, and thank you all for watching.